is a D6 generation pip. Yeah, one of those dots on the side of a six-sided die. Yeah, a pip. You know, a short pip. Little something. Yeah, about anything gaming related. Sometimes featuring Craig, sometimes featuring Russ. We'll see what's coming up today. Hey, welcome back to another D6G pip. Yes. This time around, Craig, as we may have mentioned in the show a little while ago, Craig acquired a copy of the new Adeptus Titanicus game from Games Workshop.
Yes, I did. I acquired purchasing it.
He did, and he's been rapidly expanding his collection. Now, I have not acquired it because it's basically, I mean, you could acquire your own stuff, but there's really two factions, and it's essentially a really beautiful high-end, essentially at this point, two-player, and probably going to remain it that way. I mean, I'm going to talk about how we're going to make this into a multiplayer scenario. But yeah, so it's super cool, looks amazing. We'll talk about all that stuff, and we thought, wouldn't it be fun to run this thing at Captain Con this year? And as longtime listeners will know, every year at Captain Con, which takes place in Providence, Rhode Island, in February, they've been kind enough to always invite us down, and we run different events. Whatever our favorite new miniature game of the season is. And this year it is Adeptus Titanicus. So Craig and I have been playing the heck out of this game. Craig has been painting like a fanatic, doing amazing terrain, doing an amazing job on both factions of models. And I have just been helping him play test the mechanics. So without further ado, I'd love to let Craig jump in and talk a little bit about what sucked him into Adeptus Titanicus and then what we've been doing to make the scenario special. Cool. So Craig, what got you sucked into this thing? What was like, I got to have Adeptus Titanicus out of the chute?
I would have to say that right off the chute, it was mainly nostalgia, before it even came out, because this is what started it all. So in college, I got hooked on Epic my junior year, I think, or introduced it my sophomore year. And so I went and I bought 4 armies and painted them up and brought them all home and went, hey guys, look, I have everything we need. So I started early as the alpha vector,
as the enabler.
Yeah. And I loved it. And it was pretty successful. I mean, it was really the first miniatures game most of us had played, the first formal miniatures game. And so it has always held a special place in my heart. And when they announced that Adeptus Titanicus was coming out, I thought, oh, that's going to be really cool. And of course, we've already talked about the game in some length on the show. So without getting into any of the real details of the game itself, the new version is the models are bigger. They're maybe twice the size. The quality of them is gorgeous because the old models were kind of butt ugly. And I love the fact that this is the first time in my memory that Games Workshop has really just sort of embraced the concept of magnetizing to the point where the Warlord, the big one, actually has places in it for 5mm magnets. It's actually designed to take 5mm magnets, so you can magnetize your big giant mech for all the different weapons that you might possibly get. Now, when they first came out, there's only one kit, and it came with exactly enough weapons for that one thing. So, there was a little bit of a trust issue, like, oh, are they going to come out with no more weapons? And almost immediately they did. So now there's 2 versions of the Titan that comes out. There's 3 different weapons you can put on the arms and 2 different weapons you can put on the big heavy carapace on top. And they look awesome. The detail in the model is crazy. The articulation of almost all of the models, but in particular the Warlord, the way you can move, the way you can place its legs, and I mean every element of the leg is articulated, not so like you could build it and then move it like an action figure, but you can place it and glue it and do almost any pose that you can imagine. And it was just really cool. So I wanted to get it when we were at Gen Con, but they didn't come out with it. They just had the demo stuff there. So I was kind of disappointed, but kind of not disappointed because it meant I didn't have to spend the money. Right. But then it came out because it's expensive. It's an expensive game to get into, as we've already mentioned. And I didn't want to spend all that money myself. So I approached some of our friends and I said, look, this new game is coming out, and it's the game that got us all started. So if you guys want, we can all go in together and share the cost. And then I felt awful guilty because they love doing that because none of them have time to paint anything. So they don't mind doing that at all. But I feel bad because I feel like I'm buying it. I'm painting it and I keep it at my house, so I should pay for it. So my guilt then caused me to buy a whole bunch of other Titans. And so I very quickly had more than enough Titans to do 2 full-size armies. And then we were trying to decide what we were going to do at Captain Con. And I thought, well, the main thing about Captain Con for us is we want everybody to have fun and we want it to pop on the table so people walking by get drawn in, right?
Yes.
So I thought we've got a couple different options. I mean, we could totally have gone with A Song of Ice and Fire, which looks gorgeous. And I have 2 big armies painted up and the terrain all painted up. And so that would look really cool. But that's a little bit like Rune Wars, which we did last year. Which as soon as I'm done with this little intro, remind me because there was something I'll remind myself. I'll make a note.
Okay.
Make a note.
note.
I'm putting a pin in that. Okay. And so then I was like, well, I have all the Titans that I got for the guys, and we could totally do that, and that would be kind of cool. And so I approached Russ, and Russ had a couple ideas also, and we batted everything back and forth. And what it looked like we could ultimately have that would be ready to go and have all the cool terrain and everything was Titanicus, which I thought we could easily support. Right now, the way the scenario and everything we have is set up, we could easily support 12 players,
right?
Which it would be on the slightly larger side for a Captain Con event, really.
With the idea being that there's 2 sides, but on each side, everybody's running a unit essentially. Right?
Exactly. And so the next trick was, so we have, for each side, we have 1 Warlord Titan, 1 Reaver Titan, which is the middle guy, and 2 Warhound Titans, which are the small guys, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what we've got is, we've got a lot of those nice Titans, and then the starter box comes with 2 units of 3 Knights, and Knights in 40K are like a foot tall. They're like the biggest models you can possibly get in 40K. They're they're killing everything. They're unstoppable. Well, the Knights in Adeptus Titanicus, you're talking about giant war machines that are the size of a building. So the Knights that really come up to their ankle joint are almost nothing. So in our early games, first of all of the official missions that GW puts out, the Knights can't do anything. They can't get objectives, and half their weapons can't hurt a Titan, and one of their weapons can't even conceivably hurt a Knight. So we're still kind of confused about what that weapon's all about.
As far as I can tell, there's really no point for them in the base game, unless there's going to be new missions that use them in some interesting way. So that was something we wanted to change right off the bat, right?
Exactly. So we wanted to make sure that if there was 12 people there, we had a really good, decent-sized unit that everybody would feel that they had some cool tactical options and they weren't just playing a placeholder. And the first thing I did was Russ came up with the theory that maybe it's just the numbers of the unit. So maybe 3 Knights, which is the minimum squad size. Maybe that's not enough. So I ran out and I got a bunch of more Knights. So,
of course you did. Like you do.
That's like I do. And so now we have 2 units of 6, which of course could be split into 2 units of 4 units of 3 if we really needed to, if we had a lot more people show up. And then they came out with another kind of Knight, which was the Cerastus Knight, that looks cooler, but costs a little more because it only comes 2 in a box. But they are close combat monsters, as we found in our first actual test game.
And they carry shields, so they're more resilient also.
Exactly. They carry big energy shields, so it's a lot harder to kill them than the little guys who basically go down as soon as one of the big boys points one of the big guns at them.
Right.
So so the goal now was, so we've got these units, and of course they come in boxes of 2. So I needed units of 4. So I got a bunch of those. So we now have, each side has 4 Cerastus Knights, the big close combat monster Knights. They have 6 of the smaller Knights that have all the guns on them, and all those other Titans. So we've got all these units. Now the theory is, how are we going to make there's 2 things. We need to set up the board so that it makes sense. It's tactically cool, but at the same time, it looks neat. And we have to come up with a mission where everybody feels like there's something they can do. So 2 weeks ago, Russ and I sort of sat down at the table and we figured out how to put all the terrain. And I've been playing a lot lately. So I figured I made all these buildings. So we got a bunch of the new terrain. So if you come to Captain Con, you're going to see all the cool terrain, all built and ready to go with a bunch of cool bones miniature statues that I got. So it looks really gothic and 40K and grim dark with big giant statues all over the place. And hopefully it'll be all painted up. Already it's zenithal.
It looks great already. Yeah, it looks fantastic already.
Cool. It looks cool already. Yeah. And we have one of those Games and Gears drop zone commander boards that I've kind of painted out and washed out so it doesn't look quite like a normal modern urban battlefield. So it's all gonna be set up on that 3D molded plastic boards with all this cool terrain. So we came up with a setup first, and the game is awesome. I don't want to downplay the actual missions it comes with because there's lots of cool missions and lots of cool deployment zones. One of the cool deployment zones is each side has 3 bands 6 inches deep. So one is 0 to 6 inches, and then the next band is 6 to 12, and then the next band is 12 to 18. You have to put your small units up front, your medium units in the middle, and your big units in the back. And it's sort of like your army has all kind of marched onto the board, and that's where they start the game. So I really wanted to do that so that the knights would have to be stuck in from the very beginning. And so that was the deployment zone I knew I wanted going in. So it wouldn't be, an hour of maneuver before anybody saw any action. And Russ came up with an awesome idea that let's have the knights also be able to take objectives, and let's place the terrain so that it doesn't block. The main problem that we were having in our early games is I built these buildings so that a warlord titan, the biggest titan, could hide behind them. The problem is once you get a bunch of those buildings out there, the little guys are almost invisible and can easily dodge behind a building to heal and do all kinds of stuff, which starts to get really frustrating. So putting the buildings in places where, you could get cover if you get to it, but each side's really only going to have one place to hide a warlord if they really wanted to, but then you're going to lose a turn of shooting and all kinds of other cool stuff. So we deployed the board so it's a little more open, except for these little tight spaces that Russ designed that only a knight could fit into.
Right.
And we put an objective in there so that the knights are now all of a sudden central to this whole thing. So that's a victory point every turn if you can hang that. So I'm jumping the gun a little bit. Russ, why don't you, because you really came up with a mission, why don't you talk a little bit about the thought pattern that brought us to this really cool mission that we've got now?
Well, we wanted to, one of the challenges of these kinds of events, right, is, and so this mission, you have to kind of keep in mind, this mission was designed specifically for this event. I think it could still be fun, and we've had fun playing it in other venues, but one thing you're restricted by time, right? So a couple factors. First, you're going to have like 5 or 6 people per side, each running a unit. So you want all the units to be meaningful. Obviously, the larger robots, they're going to have plenty to do, but those little units, you want to make sure they're having some fun. So they got to be meaningful. The second thing is, the event is 2 hours and it's going to end because that's when the tournament organizers show up and say, we need this table for the next event. So you got to feel like you can accomplish something in the dramatic moments in 2 hours. And this being a game of a lot of interesting complexities, with this many models on the table, it's probably a 4-hour game left to its own devices. So we knew you're probably only going to get half the number of turns you normally might get in. Plus we're teaching players. So we wanted to make sure that each move was meaningful and mattered. So thinking that through, then I figured, well, that means you're going to want objectives that you're pretty much start owning. So you're already putting pressure on players because you're already getting victory points. And you want objectives that are easily within 1 turn movement of achievement. So you can also do that. So what we came up with, and we've seen this in other games, and GW has it in 40K too, where we went with 5 objectives, 2 in each faction side. So there's 2 in your side, essentially just outside your deployment zone. So you're basically a half a move away. So you're going to get those. There's 2 on the opponent's side, and then there's 1 in the dead center of the board. And as Craig mentioned, some of the ones on your side are kind of put in alleys. So those smaller units are really essential to be able to get those. And the rule is at the end of the turn, if you've got a model in base-to-base contact with one of those objectives and the enemy does not, if you both do, nobody scores. If you've got it there, then you're going to get points, but where the objective is located on the table is going to influence how many points you get for the objective. So if you're controlling one of the objectives that started on your side, they're only worth 1 point each. If you're on one of the objectives on your opponent's side of the table, they're worth 2 points each. And if you happen to be the one controlling the center objective, it's worth 3 points. And it worked out pretty well because the game's got some great mechanics for being able to go fast. So you can basically push your engines to go faster, or you can give yourself orders for extra speed. it was definitely possible if you committed to get to the central objective in the first turn of the game and actually even be in a position where you're threatening the objectives on the other side of the table by the second turn of the game. So if you can be the player who controls that first objective in the end of round one, and you already own 2 objectives, it's really going to be 5 points to 2. So you're going to put pressure on the other side. Now, if the other side can seesaw back and take that central objective, it's going to be a lot closer. But if while that's happening, you've managed to sneak around to the back and threaten one of his own objectives, now you've got a dog race. And we were kind of hoping that's how it worked out. And what's been great is in all of our test games, that's exactly what's happened. There's been a nice big scrum in the center, but people have been getting creative about getting to those back objectives. And it's been really interesting to watch. Craig, did the mission sort of work out as well as you expected it would?
Yeah, well, we've done it twice now, and exactly as you just described, it went both times. So one side rushed forward and grabbed it in turn 1, but to do that left themselves vulnerable, where the other team got heavier units into the middle on turn 2, wiped out that first group, and took the middle objective in turn 2. So it was a split, right? So it was 3 points, and each team got 3 points from that. The problem was, and the sort of the tiebreaker in both was, who could get around the other team, clear that objective, and get somebody onto the enemy's objective, right?
Right.
And so I think that's what. At first, I was very confused why the middle would be worth more than the other guys, considering the other guys is harder to get to. And why is it, Russ? Because I think it's genius.
Well, the reason the middle's worth more is because the middle's going to be more contentious, and it'll force a center play, right? And it's just so tempting, it's going to force movement. So it really is that idea that that's the one that's hard to fight for and actually the hardest to hold. Where if you can get back to the guy's backfield, yes, it's where it seems like it's harder to get there, but it's also going to take you longer to get there, and you're probably going to have an end game movement. So it's really going to be a tiebreaker and really force those points to pivot, right?
And it also, I mean, it means that you don't have to sit back and hold those, right? Without at least, so it gives you some incentive for kind of like making that end run and not just castling up.
Yeah, it encourages mobility. It really rewards aggression, which is what we wanted to see, right?
Yep. And that's what we've seen in both of those games. We saw warhounds who can be very fast if they get the right orders and they push their reactors for extra speed. They can cross the board in one turn, right? If they're a little bit lucky with their reactors. And the knights, who are already super fast, can cross the board in one turn. And that's what we've been seeing, are these knights and these warhounds like really contesting those enemy objectives. Or in the first game, the Cerastus knights, the close combat monsters, charged across. One thing that I love about the game is you don't have all this bogging down into hand-to-hand, because the theory is, remember, these are giant building-sized robots, so they can walk away from anybody.
Right.
But if they're close enough, if you're within 2 inches of the enemy now has to use its weapon skill, which for most Titans is worse than its ballistic skill, to shoot you, because now it's like trying to bring those weapons in tight. And so the Cerastus Knights in the first game charged a Warhound. Didn't charge him. They took a sprint action so that they were right in there in 2 inches, but they couldn't attack. But the Warhound, who is not good at all in hand-to-hand and has no hand-to-hand weapons, was now forced to try to shoot at them at a severe disadvantage, did no damage. And then they just kind of walked on past and slammed into the Reaver Titan, which is the second largest Titan, and took them down in one turn and captured that objective, which was a huge swing in that game. And then the game we played last night, you could tell that the game we played last night happened after the game when the Cerastus Knights took out a Reaver in one turn, because everybody's Cerastus Knights were wiped out by turn 2.
Right.
You just weren't going to let those Knights in on any of your big boys. And last week it was our friend Chuck was playing against Russ, and last night I was playing against Dave. And so I saw Dave moving his Cerastus Knights in for a charge on my Warlord, and I just unloaded my biggest weapons that are meant to kill other Titans into that unit, and it was just too much. It overwhelmed their shields and blew them out into Kingdom Come.
Yeah, one of the tactics we discovered in the game, and it's explicit in the rule book, but you still have to really kind of see it in action to appreciate it. The void shields, which are really hard to take down, are a big deal. And so you start getting into your head, well, the way you do that is you throw lots of volume of fire. But the thing you kind of forget about is, if you're making an attack against a model within 2 inches of it, you're inside its void shields and they don't count. And so when you make these hand-to-hand combat charges, all of a sudden you're inside the void shields and massive damage starts to occur, either with ranged weapons at point blank range or melee attacks. And so that's what we discovered. We've been coaching players about that. And all of a sudden now it becomes a real big knife fight.
Yeah. And it's awesome. And I love the fact that the game doesn't differentiate hand-to-hand or ranged. It's just the attack phase. So you don't have to worry about, when does this attack? It's just another weapon. And if you're in range, which for most of these close combat weapons is 2 inches, it's just another weapon you get to attack with. Right. So it gives you more options, and it's not the only thing that's fiddly that we've found so far are these ridiculous little knights with these guns that fire a bajillion dice and can't dent their own armor.
And what's worse is the little guys all have different weapons.
Yeah.
None of the differences on most of them are that meaningful because they really don't hurt much. There's only like 2 weapons in the unit that actually have a chance in most cases, or maybe 3. So really, I just want to, for our game, I kind of was talking to Craig, but we should just change them all to either be mattering or just change them all so they don't, and they're really just objective holders, right? But like sitting down and trying to figure out which guy's carrying which weapon and does he have range or does he have not really slows the game down. And I'm not really sure I don't think the bang for the buck is there.
Exactly. There's no discernible reason to do that because they're not doing any damage.
Right.
I think what we're going to do is they're all going to probably have rapid fire battle cannons because that's sort of like the middle ground weapon.
Yeah.
And has more range. So they'll be if we give them all the melta-guns where they've only got 12-inch range, I think they're going to feel more limited. But we'll be deciding that over the course of the next week. But yeah, so the mission worked exactly the way we intended, which was awesome. And it was a lot of fun. The thing is, because it's all objective based, you're not necessarily going for Titan kills. You're more trying to knock people off objectives and maneuver and things like that. So in the first game that Russ played against Chuck, there really wasn't, I don't think the Reaver died at the very end because the Cerastus Knights got in on him. But that was it, right?
Yes, there was not very much damage.
No.
It was really more about the objectives and just trying to knock people off the objectives, which I liked actually, because it felt like literally every move mattered, and even as we ran out of time, it was down to the wire and you're playing for it. So it didn't feel like you had too few moves in the 2-hour gameplay, even though it was really only, I think, 2.5 or 3 turns. Yeah. And nor did it feel like it didn't matter what you did about halfway through. It was really down to, in both games, actually, it felt like it right down to the last move.
Oh, it really was. I mean, one game you were way ahead. The first game you were way ahead. And then in the end, because the Reaver died and Chuck took the centerpiece. So it shifted a lot in the first game. In the second game, it was only a 1-point game. And that 1 point was really because I felt like there was no way he could get to my tight little objective that my knights were holding, but he had opened an avenue towards his Titan objective and abandoned it to try to attack my knights. So I had won initiative, so his knights had come off first to try to attack me, but he left an avenue. So my knights just sprinted around and took his objective for 2 points instead of the 1 point objective I was holding, and that was the point that I won by. So right. It's super. Oh no! Did he win by 1? No, he won by 1 because he took the center objective.
Oh yes, that's right.
But it would have been a bigger spread if I hadn't done that. Never mind. I'm not as good as I think I am. But
it was still fun to watch.
And a lot more damage was being dished out yesterday too. We were being much more aggressive with the actual Titans. And so what we've done is now we've kind of fine-tuned. When you show up at Captain Con on Saturday morning, the board will be set up, the units will already be deployed, and we'll be ready to go. That's the theory. So because we've had these 2 games under our belt, hopefully maybe even we'll get 1 more before then, and everything will be fine-tuned. The placement of the buildings is exactly what we want, and it's a very balanced mission. Especially you've got to be very careful in allocating your units to your objectives. Like, what am I going to do with these? Am I going to try to go kill that unit so he can't with it, or am I going to rush that unit over to try to take an objective from him? So there's a lot of tactical and strategic thinking that's going into it, which I really, really like. And I liked it better last night only because there was so much damage being done. You felt like you were doing more, right?
Yes.
So you were taking these objectives. It wasn't quite as high a scoring game as the first game because there was more focus being put on the damage layout and people were being a little more conservative in their movement, a little more aggressive with their weapons. So there wasn't quite as much territory being covered by most of the units. but what you got was a really nice mix of dishing out damage and taking the objective. So you had the Warhounds are crazy fast, so they always end up in the places you least likely to expect. And my Reaver just kept getting pummeled, and it was pure bad luck. He was like, "Oh, I guess I don't have any other targets. Oh, this guy will just shoot the Reaver. Oh, his shields go down." Seriously.
Right.
And oh, this guy doesn't have any targets either. Oh, he'll shoot at the Reaver. Oh, I got a damage point. And the next thing you know, I won initiative more often than not. And the thing about charges is you have to declare a charge, right? And then pass a command check to make sure you can do it. But you don't get to do the charge till the movement phase. And if you don't have initiative, the other guy's going to be able to move out of your range or out of your arc. And so that's what I did, not realizing that put my Reaver in a perfect position for him to go in and gun down, which is
right.
what he's trying to do. Unfortunately for him, the Reaver does have a power fist. He's got a big, giant Titan power fist. So he got close enough to try to get into my shields, didn't do enough damage with his guns, and then I just pummeled him with the fist. Then he blew up and almost destroyed my Reaver.
Right.
But yeah, it's so I'm really loving the way the mission works, the board looks. I just have to finish the good guys paint jobs, and I think we'll be good to go.
Yeah, I think it's coming out pretty nice. I think it's a lot of fun to play. And quite frankly, Games Workshop is cranking out lots of new missions. So, I don't know where they're going on these mission cards. And of course they could have some missions, I guess, have the little guys be able to grab them. I think it's kind of a core rule that they can't grab objectives, but I think that makes those little units actually interesting and fun to play. Yeah. So I don't know that I would, and when Craig and I first played the game before we had thought of our own scenario, I really felt like I didn't understand the purpose of those little units. It felt neat, and they had them there because the old game had them, but it was almost like the designers didn't know what to do with the models, so they just made them work in terms of scale and proportional power as it based on the fluff of the 40K universe, but they had no purpose on the battlefield, which was sort of weird. Yeah. Now they feel very purposeful. And you can imagine if you sprinkle the battlefield with more objectives, breaking those from larger units to small units would be even more interesting and strategic, because now you could have them running in all different directions, and your opponent can easily one-shot these little units, but which one do you one-shot, right? Because they're all over the place. So I think that could be a lot of fun, and your opponent could spend time killing all your little guys to remove your strategic options, but if they're doing that, they're not shooting your big guys, and maybe your opponent shooting your big guy. And Craig and I had talked about maybe killing one of the large, the main Titan there, giving you some victory points, maybe giving 3 or 4 points for that, because it should feel glorious to kill that. But for our particular scenario, we didn't want to really encourage player elimination too much, because we kind of wanted all the folks running a model to be there till the end. And on our current scenario, units aren't wholesale wiped out until near the end anyway, so it's not very big deal. So we didn't put that in there. But I think if I were going to make this sort of an official scenario or something you want to play, I think I might add that in there just to make it another option. But again, if you're shooting the big Titan and it takes a lot of work to kill those guys, you're not killing the little units who are still going to be grabbing objectives. So it might make for another exciting tactical challenge, right?
Yeah. Oh, I agree 100%. I wanted to put to reward the killing the big Titans with points, but I agree with Russ 100% that that's really not what you're trying to do. It kind of takes away from the overall objective of what we're trying to do, which is everybody to have fun and nobody to be eliminated, except on a rare occasion when they get charged by a Cerastus Knight.
That's right.
So so that's why there's that very common objective to kill the enemy isn't part of this, but I would definitely, for a friendly game or a more standard game, I would definitely put that in because that would also give you what I always appreciate in miniatures games, which is another path to victory, right? It's more fun. There's more options for victory, and you reward more different strategies.
It also might make you a little less bold with your main Titan, right? If he was worth like 6 points or 7 points, so it was like really worth a lot to make it really sort of a juicy target, you might not be so bold to stand him sort of in a very great visibility spot to be able to hose everyone, in which case you wouldn't be as easy for you to kill the little guys grabbing objectives. So I think it would make the scenario more interesting, just not what we're trying to pull off. But I think I'd like to try that in the future, Craig, when we're just doing it for fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, and by the way, if you're interested in that scenario, I'm working on making a pretty version that kind of matches the current card art. And then we'll publish that on Patreon on our website. So if you want to download it and give the scenario a try, that'll be available about the time Captain Con happens. So about 2 weeks to when the show goes live.
Yep. Super looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I'm super excited about this. I think it looks fantastic. And you know, Craig's been very humble about how the terrain looks amazing. The models look fantastic. He's got the decals all over them. Check our Twitter feed for pictures because just looks beautiful. And the game plays nice. The game plays, it feels like you're running these giant robots. And, you know, our friend Dave from the Nerd Herders, he gave it a try the other night and he was kind of like, it's okay. And then afterwards, about 15 minutes later, he's like, so I think I'm going to buy this.
Yeah.
So it's one of those games where you play it, you're like, pretty cool. And you just can't get it out of your head. So it's a fun game. You know, Games Workshop, again, really captured the nostalgia of their old games with modernizing the rules. And of course, they've still got one of the best sci-fi universes on the planet. And it's just so much fun to jump in there and stomp about in big robots. So, yeah, check out Adeptus Titanicus. And if you happen to be in the Providence, Rhode Island area, in the second week in February here, please come by and
join us.
Say hi. Yeah. And try some Titanicus with us.
Absolutely.
Achievement unlocked. You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@thed6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening and happy gaming.